get the opportunity to bring 180 law students from University of Alberta for all the first year students to be able to come out to Enoch Cree Nation to be able to experience the Kairos blanket exercise. And so we're able to use blankets to sort of create the idea of what Canada would have looked like, the landscape of Canada. And as they take a walk through history and they're embodying Indigenous people, they're able to see how colonization and how legislation and laws have really affected Indigenous people's land base, their rights, their livelihood, and their lives themselves. So they physically see blankets being taken away, people being removed from the blankets because of various things like smallpox, residential schools, murdered and missing Indigenous women. So they're able to get an idea of what it is like to be an Indigenous person from pre-contact to today, in today's current situation.
I do want to set the situation a little bit and let you know why this is part of the law school curriculum and why Indigenous law has become an important part of the legal curriculum across the country. So in the early 2000s, there was a class action litigation commenced in relation to the survivors of residential schools. And the action was against the federal government and a number of other organizations that were running the residential schools. The settlement that was achieved in that class action had many components to it, but one of the major components was that there be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission established to review the experiences of those in residential schools. Coming out of that commission in 2015 was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. It had 94 calls to action, and one of those calls to action, number 28, was that all law schools in Canada should make sure to educate their students on the history of Indigenous experience in Canada and the history of residential schools and laws as they apply to the Indigenous community. So since that time, all of the law schools across Canada have been incorporating Indigenous law as a part of their mandatory curriculum. We have chosen to start off our foundations course in a good way by including some of those components in this course. I want to let you know that while all the law faculties across Canada include Indigenous law components in their curriculum, and most in their first year, not all of them have this sort of an experience. We owe this experience to the incredible work that's being done at our faculty by people like Dr. Hadley Friedland and everybody at Wahkohtowin Lodge, Corin Lightning Earl. They're doing a tremendous job with respect to both researching in the areas of Indigenous law, engaging with Indigenous communities, and helping us to make sure that our law students receive the education that they need.
It's really important to engage in these exercises on Indigenous land, because it's one thing to learn about Indigenous peoples in the classroom, but if you can be a guest on their lands, as we all are by being on Treaty 6, but to be invited by a nation to learn about Indigenous peoples and to learn about their history while being on the land, it really grounds you, figuratively and physically to the history of the area and to the history of Indigenous people. So it's really important that these students were able to come out here onto the nation. And for many students, this is the first time they've ever been on an Indigenous nation. So for them, I think it's quite an eye-opening and an honoring experience.